Can I get a show of hands? Who has seen Once Upon a Time? Okay. All right. It's not that there's spoilers, but it's just good to know. I know you probably get this question a lot, but you grew up in Northern California and you have worked in fashion styling and as a designer on film and on stage. How did you sort of get into that? What's the circuitous route that happened?
Twisty, not linear, and not traditional. I just have to say that I was raised in Northern California, but we spent almost a year in BC when I was a kid. My parents were bohemian, kind of in the 70s when they weren't draft dodgers, but they came up here to kind of go back to the land, and we spent 9 months in the Okanagan Valley, and I have such fond memories of being a Canadian brownie.
And look for that in a uniform inspiration sometime in a film.
But I was raised in a family of artists, and my parents really made a decision to break away from the traditional way that they were raised, and they encouraged my sister and I to kind of express ourselves artistically, and so we didn't have a television, which was kind of a trend, I think, in the 70s. I also wasn't allowed to have Barbie dolls. So I kind of went the opposite way. I became obsessed with pop culture. And, it was, I guess, the ultimate rebellion, but also at the same sense, I was raised in a youth culture movement because my parents were very young when they had me. So I think that was the kind of the fertile ground for this kind of unusual career, I would say. I mean, it has been, I often say that I have crafted a career based on my creative ADD. And I mean that kind of in jest, because I've chosen to try things that, so I don't know, I digress. I don't have a traditional education. I moved to New York to continue college from the Bay Area, and I wanted to go into fashion styling, and I guess my serendipity beginning was that my friend at the time, sister, went to high school with Lenny Kravitz, who needed a place to stay when he was recording his first record, and we kind of came up together, and that got me a lot of, I think, I was super lucky to have that notoriety because he's so talented, and we were able to work together on the visual side.
Well, and this is New York sort of just after the Mud Club and all those sort of that kind of era, right?
86.
So there's all this cross-pollination anyway, right, of music and fashion and everything.
Yeah, I mean, what we were doing was, yes, it was. It was very, it was post kind of Madonna's era, I guess.
Okay. We're going to start talking a little bit about costume design, and we'll come back to fashion. But costume and fashion are kind of often conflated. People get them, they assume that they're the same thing. So, what is your now working definition of costume design and its role, and how it sort of differs from fashion?
Sure. Costume design is really about creating characters, and which in turn tell the story. Fashion is a timeline of relevance. So to me, fashion is a reflection of what's happening in our culture at any given time. So whether it's a Gainsborough painting from the 17th century to Vogue magazine in the 60s, fashion is a cultural reference of what is relevant in a moment in time. So fashion is part of the research, just in terms of not every character is fashionable, but just seeing kind of this heightened, stylized version of what the culture is about. As a fashion stylist, it's like more curation, hunting and gathering, working with, which is how I started. Working as a freelance stylist in the early days in New York, just on straight up fashion, it was about kind of in those days, it wasn't as much about advertising as it is now in magazines. The magazines that are left, because now we're changing again. We're going through a digital revolution where magazines are having to reinvent themselves digitally. But a lot of what you see editorially in a fashion magazine, from like Flair to Vogue to whatever it is, if you're interested in reading that, usually it's a reflection of who's advertising in the magazine, unfortunately, now, because magazines are dying, and they have to stay alive. So that's been going on for the last 10 years. It's not as creative as it was like when I started in the 80s, where we would make things for fashion shoots. We'd come up with concepts, and then I would hunt and gather from fashion designers.
Which is much more that era of like Face, ID, those sort of magazines,
and
right?
that's what really informed me, street fashion and everything. But fashion can also be narrative and conceptual, and it's tableau work. I love photography, and I love working in print, and I feel that it's helped me in terms of details. And the minutia of design and balance. Styling being a fashion editor is really about balance. So I felt like it was a great training ground for me, just in terms of design and color for my eventual, eventually getting into film, if that makes sense.
But your fashion work is often very narrative, and the sort of narratives that you do, whether it's a Madonna concert tour, there's sort of it's still commentary. Like sometimes there's a cultural commentary on it. So
I'm more attracted to that than lifestyle. I'm much more into stylized, and I have gravitated to collaborate with photographers or artists who also think in the narrative sense. So in the beginning of my career, I certainly worked with all kinds of photographers and all kinds of, but yeah.
Well, one of the examples I always think of with your work in terms of illustrating the way in which maybe a costume gives you clues about a character, or gives you sort of it's this paradox, right? Because it's supposed to be invisible. You're not supposed to notice it. It's almost subliminal to the audience, is the Girl Interrupted, which is another of your credits. And the choice to put Angelina Jolie's character in suede pants. Like, there's a lot of very tactile things in her character.
That's observant. I mean, the thing for me, I really believe costumes are beam-me-up suit for an actor. So, of course, costumes are really important for visual cues for the audience, to underscore tone and feeling, and tell us that it's about identity, right? How we dress ourselves. But I also believe that as a costume designer, my job is also to inform the actor, to help them get there. So I think of the costume physically as a beam-me-up suit, and that inspiration came early on from when I was in high school. I thought I wanted to be an actor, and I read Stanislavski books and Uta Hagen, and there's a quote from Laurence Olivier that he said he always started with his character from the shoes up, and that just resonated for me, even at that time when I thought I wanted to be an actor, because of the physicality of the costume and how it can inform the actor. And then early on, my second movie, which was Tank Girl, which is based on a graphic novel, Malcolm McDowell was cast, which I just was beside myself with excitement, because I'd been kind of raised on his films by my parents. And he came, we were doing a fitting. It was, actors oftentimes are, they're very prolific, where they're moving they'll do 2 weeks here on a movie and a month here, and they're not always with you in the whole time. And it's pre-internet, so I didn't have any communication with him. I never talked to him. I was really nervous. And he was working 3 days after I would fit him, and I designed almost like 80% of the costumes in Tank Girl it wasn't a shopped movie, so all his costumes were built without him. So I was really nervous that he might walk in and say, oh, none of this is right, I don't like this, or this isn't what I was thinking. And just the opposite happened. He came in and he was so grateful because he hadn't had time to do research about the character. And he was like, thank you so much. I didn't know I haven't had time. I really don't know who my character is, and you've helped me so much. So that really informed me as a young costume designer about how I can help assist an actor. And that was and is super inspiring to me.
Well, it's interesting that you say that start with the shoes, because there's someone who really likes to shoot, and there's a lot of shots of feet and shoes in Once Upon a Time. Can you tell us how does was the pitch or the brief, the way you and Quentin Tarantino kind of came to work together, different than it would have been? Like, did you pitch sort of ideas once you were approached, or did you approach him, and like, how did it come about?
The way that I got the movie was really by chance, Quentin's been on my dream list. I never actually really thought I would ever get the chance to work with him. I worked with him once on a photo shoot when he was promoting *Inglourious Bastards*, and I actually styled him on a photo shoot, and didn't dare say, "Oh, I'm a costume designer too," but I just remember kind of having an epiphany that day that I'll probably never get to work with him as a costume designer. And you do these photo shoots and they're fleeting, but I really kind of got him that day, and I'm such a fan of his work. So I was super curious on how the process would be with him. I don't know, let's see how to dive in. So I was working on another film that was set in Los Angeles in Northern California in the 70s. And it was actually a film about Patty Hearst, which growing up in the Bay Area in California was a story that existed in my childhood. So I was really excited about it. That film I worked on for about 3 weeks with Jim Mangold, who I've done 5 films with. And that film went down, like after 3 weeks of prepping it, and I was heartbroken. And the whole time that I was prepping that movie, the producer kept saying, you need to go into the costume house and get your stock for your background. I'm sure lots of people here know what I mean by that, but stock meaning like all my period clothes from different costume houses to dress my background and some day players. And he said, because Quentin Tarantino is doing a movie set in LA in the 60s or the 70s, he thought it was the 70s, and we need to get those clothes. So get in there.
Right.
And so I knew he was working on movies. Okay. So the day the movie went down, I had to call my agent. I said, if there's any way you can find out if Quentin's hired a costume designer, I'm sure he has. So lucky for me, to make a long story short, I got the opportunity to interview with him. And before that, I got to read the script. And when I went to go read the script, it was, I had to read it at the office, and it was kept in a safe. And
it's just like Margaret Atwood's The Testaments. You have to go in a locked room. And
exactly.
Okay.
It was not like anything I'd ever experienced. I think once I read a Michael Mann script and I had to read it, but it wasn't in a safe, so I had to read it in the office. But I couldn't have my cell phone and I couldn't have a pen and paper. So I knew that after I read the script, I wanted to make a presentation for him of my impressions of how I would go about it. So I was completely freaked out because it usually takes me 2 or 3 times to read a script to get it in my head. I thought, how am I going to read this script and absorb it and be able to do a worthy presentation? So that was anxiety producing. But then once I started reading the script, which they warned me would take 2 hours, which it took me about 2.5. Normally it takes me about an hour and a half to read a script. This was almost double because Quentin's, his writing is, I'm sure he probably has released, I don't even know, like his scripts. People can probably get them places, but he's such a descriptive writer, and it was so richly layered, so full of details, that I magically absorbed it. And it was, I think, without question, the best script I've ever read. And I enjoyed it so much and was so inspired to to do a good job, to get the
Right.
job, in terms of a presentation. So I did that. I put a presentation together, and I sent it to his office ahead of my meeting. I made it kind of a sexy presentation. I put like a Hawaiian shirt in there, and I put like some Brill cream in there. And
Are
some
you a
vintage
Pinterest user, or what were you? Were you like grabbing
no,
things?
no,
for a
no,
second?
no, no, no. I made two really big books of visual
Okay.
reference, and then I actually put physical things in a box, like a Hawaiian shirt that would fit him, a vintage one.
Is that the one we see him in the behind the scenes shots from the movie?
No, he has
Oh, okay.
his own array of Hawaiian shirts. And that was one of the things that was so exciting about reading the script as a costume designer is we know how iconic these characters are that he's created. And, you read that Cliff Booth, the character Brad Pitt plays, in the script is wearing a Hawaiian shirt, and immediately, like, I'm thinking of True Romance, and I'm thinking of Christian Slater and Tim Roth, and, the language, the vernacular of the style of Quentin Tarantino is consistent. So I was super curious what the collaboration would be like. I had heard a lot of crazy rumors. And when we first had that meeting, I thought, well, if I'm comfortable with him in my interview, I would ask him his process if I felt comfortable.
Right.
Because he's intimidating. He's physically tall, and he's very enthusiastic, and he gesticulates, and he stands up, and he's incredible, but he's a little intimidating. He's Quentin Tarantino. So he asked me as many questions as I asked him, one of the things he asked me was if he said that whenever he writes about costume in the script, that he means it. So when he writes a Hawaiian shirt, he means he wants to see a Hawaiian shirt when he writes a leather jacket. And most of the time when there's scripted costume, like a red dress or whatever is in the script, I would say like 80% of the time my experience has been the director saying, oh, it's not literally that. We'll figure out what that is. And this was the first time he said, nope, I mean exactly what I've written. And I said, okay. And he goes, but if you have another idea, bring it to the table. So make me that Hawaiian shirt, but also make me what you think would be good. And that to me was so exciting because not only does he have, obviously, a strong point of view and an idea of what he's thinking visually, but he's open to other ideas as well. So that wasn't the question you asked me. You asked me what the first day after I got the job, he handed me a list. This is more answering your question of reference of television shows and films to watch. And there is no way in hell I could have watched all these. I had seen a couple of them, a few of them, but this was an extensive list. But lucky for us, Quentin does movie nights when he's prepping. So he owns a theater in LA called the New Beverly. If you're ever in LA, you should go. It's a great screen. They're usually 35 millimeter prints. It's the candy and the popcorn are the same price as they probably were when we were kids. It is fabulous. And he was renovating the theater when we were prepping the film. And so once a week, he would have movie night, and he would show movies that were shot in LA in the late 60s. So we watched all kinds of amazing movies. And it was incredible. The first time I went to one of these screenings, like the horse wrangler was there, and like the gaffer was there, and my experience with any kind of, projected dailies, or I actually have never worked on a film when a director's shown a film to the crew, but usually it's like department heads, right, and talent and producers, and this is so great. Everyone would come to these weekly screenings. So it really created a sense of camaraderie.
Right, so everyone's on the same page when you're shooting, because you're also shooting on 35, which means that you're not looking at a monitor when you're looking at what's happening, right?
There's no monitor except for Bob Richardson, the cinematographer, had a little monitor on the camera that if you were lucky enough to get close, you could look at it, or Quentin sometimes had a handheld monitor. But no, no monitors, no cell phones on the set at all. Matter of fact, if your cell phone rings or you're caught with one, the threat was that you're fired.
Oh, wow,
And
okay.
Quentin made that which was actually great. It was so wonderful because it really means everyone's present, and it's a really collaborative group of people, a true family. It was unlike anything I've ever experienced.
So what were some of the, I mean, there are these extensive lists, and I've seen different variations in different people from the film talking about the references that resonated for them. What were some of the more salient ones for you that helped you get a sense of what he was going for? Because it's such a Russian nesting doll. I mean, you think, oh, it's just, 3 days in the life, but there's all these flashbacks within flashbacks and all kinds, it's like a movie within a movie. So was there something in particular that you went, oh, I get it, that unlocked it? Or did you've worked on Westerns in the sense of the Nocturnal Animals, the sort of the West, the way those men dress in sort of the Western style, or the 3:10 to Yuma. Did that inform some of the?
Well, I think the greatest thing for a costume designer and for me working on this film is that it's about real life events, and they're biographical characters, that real people that existed, and at the center of that is two fictional characters. So usually I've done a few biopics, and so usually that process for me is quite linear. You just amass as much of what was and make decisions that are, aligned with how the director like that. But for this, we had, so it was super juicy for me. So you have Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth, who are fictitious characters, that are inspired by, all kinds of different actors and Hollywood types that Quentin would share with us. And then all these real life characters. So the research process was fantastic and a lot of fun and incredible. And I mean, so much resonated. I mean, it was really good to see Lancer, the real Lancer. That really helped. And, a lot of different TV shows and movies. I don't know, I guess it was just like, it was great I watch a lot of TV shows and movies with Robert Culp. Quentin really likes
He's
him
the
a
best
lot.
Columbo villain ever. He really is, yeah.
He was super stylish.
Yeah.
I loved him in Ted, Carol, and Alice. I mean, so much. It was a lot of fun.
So I'm hoping we can maybe unpack the three principal characters and sort of around them. And even though this is incredible richness, and hopefully we get to that, of the background and the subcultures that you're kind of playing on, because it's not a homogenous Los Angeles in 1969 at all, right? You've got all these moving parts, these different kind of, subcultures. So we've got Cliff. And I put a lot of photos of, there's some photos of Steve McQueen, because Steve McQueen kind of haunts the movie in so many different ways. Like he informs the movie and he's in the movie.
That's so cool, that picture of Luke.
And the gentleman cowboy. Kind of.
I've never seen that picture of Luke.
Oh. So can we maybe take a look at Leonardo DiCaprio's character, who wears sort of one particular jacket throughout a lot of the film, like the leather jacket, and you built most of the principals, or all of the principals' clothes, right?
He has a couple leather jackets. There's one we built, and then there's a vintage one. Well, I mean, you kind of can't talk about one without talking about the other. I mean, here you got this character, Rick Dalton, who has found himself. At this point, he had been this big TV Western star, and he hasn't quite made that transition like Steve McQueen or other actors of his generation to being a movie star. And his career's on the downward trajectory. And here his guy, Cliff Booth. Wow, what's that?
That's people assembling their cosplay for Halloween.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Actually, I have to say, in my initial interview with Quentin, he said to me, "My mark of great costumes are when people try imitate my characters, and it takes effort because you can't buy those costumes in a box."
Right, yeah, you can't get the Darth Vader helmet or
So
whatever.
that was kind of like his, I think, call to action for me of like, kind of freaked me out, but
Well, it's,
it's like, okay, pressure's on. But anyway, so Rick and Cliff. Yeah, so Rick is, he's finding himself at a point of where he is redundant, basically, and Hollywood's changing. The thing about 1969 is it's just, and it's in the core of the script. It's really a change. It's such a change year. It reminds me a lot of now, how we are changing into this digital culture, and it's so interesting as a costume designer, just that period, because when you looking at a lot of reference, and I'm the same age as Quentin, so I have kind of fuzzy memory, romantic childhood 7-year-old memories of the time, but a slice of that culture, and you really just see a little bit of everything, and you see how people are changing from, like Rick Dalton still wears his hair in that 50s kind of pompadour with product in his hair. And this is when like Peter Fonda is making Easy Rider, and Dennis Hopper, and he is not he's not relevant, really.
no, and he's sort of the last. If he feels like the kind of guy who was trained in the studio system, he was one of the last contract players who like learned how to ride and all the different things, and then he doesn't really know how to adapt to this new kind of acting style either, right? This sort of method style.
Absolutely. And then the Brad Pitt's character, Cliff Booth, who's his longtime stuntman, and obviously he's invested in this guy, right? He's been his guy, and Rick's career has, unfortunately, it hasn't panned out for him either, and we kind of see that. We see the way he lives. And Quentin did something really interesting in the script, in that whole idea that of the rumor that Cliff Booth killed his wife, but you don't really know. It's like a rumor about him, which I think is really interesting, because as a stuntman, it makes him unpredictable. As a character, it makes him unpredictable because his job is a stuntman, and he's, I think it's such a interesting profession, just in terms of the kind of personalities. I mean, what kind of people like throw themselves off buildings?
Well, the way that he drives, I mean, it's really, there's these moments where you see how he drives when he's alone in the car that kind of tell you exactly what his personality is, this sort of risk seeker kind of thing.
I think that adrenaline thing, I think there's something really, we don't really know about him the whole way through, which for the people that haven't seen the movie, but really informs us as we go along and where we end up. And I just thought that, Cliff's character just has, Brad's character has such a ease to him, and he's the support guy. He even says it in the opening scene when they're being interviewed. And there are some moments in the script that I just loved, where I got to make costumes, double costumes, which all the time as a costume designer, there's other people who work in costume. I mean, or work on film sets. You know what it's like to see like the actor and his stunt person or her stunt person walking around in the same costume with a lousy wig. I mean, it's hilarious. So
we get to see that in the movie
Yeah.
too, which is sort of like there's a level of wit there that's sort of like working on top of it. So
yeah, it's super fun to work on a movie about Hollywood when you are in Hollywood.
there's a few. Well, there's probably more than a few in jokes, but there's that one line that the producer, I think, of the pilot says, I want it zeitgeisty, 1869, but 1969, and I'm thinking, oh, every costume designer, the director, I was groaning. I'm thinking that's probably happened to you.
Oh, sure.
Like
when he's in the trailer and he's telling Rick he wants him to wear a mustache and a cool suede coat with fringe that you'd see on Sunset Boulevard, and he's like, I don't want to be a hippie, like, right? That part.
See, that
that's
moment,
funny.
I totally saw Outlaw Country there. Like, I was like, Waylon Jennings was what I kept picturing
right.
with that character. But I want to ask
Fun
about the
fact, though, I have
oh,
to say, the costume designer in that scene, I don't know if you guys remember, the costume designer who was asked to make the jacket for Rick Dalton is actually the costume designer from Hateful Eight, Courtney Hoffman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So,
who's wonderful. She's a director now,
right.
a director writer, and she put in a good word for me, and she's for getting this movie, and so that was super fun.
Oh, nice.
Most, I would say that probably 40% of the crew is cameos in, I mean, not that Courtney's part of our crew, but 40% of the shooting crew had cameos in the movie.
Okay.
I
Do
didn't-
you?
No, and that's the thing. You kind of have to earn your stripes.
Oh.
Most of these people, all those people have worked on other Quentin movies.
So the 10th Quentin Tarantino movie,
hopefully,
maybe.
if I'm
Okay.
invited back.
Well, if I had to think of one way to describe Cliff's costume, his icon, it's now iconic because people are assembling their Halloween costumes, and Champion has reissued, or there's been reissues of the T-shirt and stuff.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't even know
yeah.
that. That happened, the Champion t-shirt is full Quentin. That happened in the fitting. It was a white t-shirt with, we figured out with Brad, Quentin, and I, we figured out what the motif and what the color of the Hawaiian shirt would be. And Quentin's like, it'd be really cool if he had a Champion shirt, spark plug t-shirt. I'm like, okay, so we
He's
made
so
it.
mellow. Like everything about his costume is mellow, and it comes down to the footwear. I was thinking about that.
moccasin.
So the moccasins, which I'm thinking they're on a Western. So you have Rick Dalton, who kind of, in the way they did at the time, kind of adopts his persona in real life a little bit, so that people, when fans meet him, he's sort of got the Western boots. And then you get Cliff, who, of all the things he could pick out on a Western, it's the indigenous moccasin kind of thing that's like stealth and makes no sound. I don't know. It just sort of seemed like very unexpected.
I like that. My thinking was, we watched Billy Jack, and which informed.
And I put a
Tom
photo of
Laughlin.
him in here. I put a photo of him for you.
And the as we call it in America, the Canadian tuxedo, denim on denim.
We call it the Texas tuxedo up here,
good,
just so you know.
Really? You do? That's hilarious.
We call it the Texas tuxedo, yeah.
That's so funny. So he's wearing the Texas Canadian tuxedo.
Right.
And in Billy Jack, Tom Laughlin is, when he does those badass moves, he's barefoot, which is just like the ultimate, right? Like you always think of those guys as having, shit kicker boots. So I thought how cool it would be that he has very soft shoes, something that where, if you think about moccasins, to me, they're very vulnerable. You can almost feel the ground. And I also thought that it was, Quentin and I talked a lot about Cliff, and Cliff is changing a bit with the times. His hair is a little shaggier. He's very relaxed in what he wears, but the idea that those moccasins had a little bit of what was relevant at the time, a little referential. I like the Western thing. That too. That could be part of it too. Why not?
Who knows?
I mean, I love that. But I had been thinking kind of a little bit. So we see him at Spawn Ranch. He's like a little bit. He's not. Of course, he's not a hippie, but it's just a little bit of the fashion.
He's in tune with it, and yet
Just a little bit. He's aware that the times are changing.
And there was something you found for his costume that was quite serendipitous, right? That's kind of
Yeah.
that's the hard thing that people can't get in a box, I guess. Right, that's the
Yeah.
element there.
I mean, one of the greatest things about and the hunting gathering part of being a costume designer is I've had a few of these moments where I've come across something that really becomes like a character talisman. In this case, I found this belt buckle at Warner Brothers Costumes, that Stuntman's Association belt buckle. I called a friend of mine who's a stuntman, and he said, "Oh yeah, those were, they don't do them anymore, but in the 60s and 70s, you could order a stunt. If you were in the Stuntmen's Association, you can order a belt buckle. Well, this was just like, I just couldn't wait to tell Brad Pitt. I was like, I'm going to be his best. He's going to love me forever. And because, it's Brad Pitt and Quentin, too, both of them. I just was so excited. I could barely control myself in our next fitting. Like, look what I found. And they loved it, too. And that just really came the grounding. I knew that I wanted him to have something something with gravitas, like a belt buckle. Like I was looking at rodeo belt buckles, actually. And like Hal Needham and guys like that, they're just
proud
had a
of what they do,
swagger
right?
And
Yeah,
a swagger. So when I found that, which I didn't even know existed, that was everything for me. And that became my Laurence Olivier shoes. That became my Cliff Booth kind of major point.
Because he wears it with the
wears it
white on
throughout the
white
whole
throughout
movie,
the thing, which I love.
No, he doesn't wear.
Oh, he doesn't wear with the white
snakeskin belt.
Snakeskin.
Or maybe he does. Maybe he does. I don't even remember.
I love
see
the
a
airport
picture.
arrival scenes, actually, because it sort of gives you all this data without actually, you sort of get a sense of what's happened to them wherever they may be. And he's in the white on white. Is that his Italian kind of? That's what he's taken from Italy versus, say, like Rick Dalton coming back with maybe a little like
Wayne
the
Newton
cravat or
hair.
something. Yeah, he had a cravat.
Like a neck scarf, Tommy Smothers style.
Right. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, the idea was that they go to Italy. They've made some money. They're buying clothes. The guys are back. They're in the swing of things again. And yeah.
Was there was there any reason logistically you wanted Cliff in white? Because I mean, he's in at night, right? We see him walking at night. Was that part of it too? Like he's in the trousers, I think, when he's walking around the dog.
Yeah,
neighborhood.
And the
or
black
for,
t-shirt.
I mean, it's a Quentin Tarantino movie, or for blood splatter.
What blood?
Well, not
No,
blood.
no.
Not
Yeah. No spoilers.
Okay, right.
Still.
potentially. Yeah.
Well, for me, also studying Quentin's movies, something that I felt I had in common with Quentin is Quentin has a lot of black and white in his costumes. I really wanted to be part of his style vernacular. Like I really wanted the costumes to feel like a Quentin film. So I spent a lot of time, of course I'd seen all his movies, but I spent a lot of time looking at them again. And one thing that I love black and white as well. And I, when you think of like Pulp Fiction and Uma Thurman and John Travolta and various different, and a sense of graphic, even the yellow Kill Bill with the black stripe, or anyway, I felt that it was a great way to kind of clean Cliff up and give him a little bravado. I think probably the same thinking I had with I mean, it's interesting. Over the years, I think I use color a lot, or the lack of it. So if I look back, I think I have a tendency to go minimal in a way.
It's like a high contrast. Like when I
Yeah,
think of
yeah.
some of the WE costumes and the sort of the fabrics and things that you've used, maybe. Or for example, another serendipitous item I think was the Julianne Moore dress in A Single
Black and
Man,
white.
which
The
is
black
very
and white
graphic
dress, yeah,
and
very
has sort
graphic.
of an interesting backstory.
Yeah,
So-
Winona Ryder, striped shirt, and grown up. I just have a tendency to gravitate towards that.
I mean, was it fun being able to? Because there's some very literal recreation moments, and so
We
you recreated
that one right before.
Yeah, The Great Escape.
Yeah.
Where you were wanting to be literal there to completely
Yeah,
do
because
those.
we inserted
Yeah.
Leo into the film, like in a Zelig kind of way. So,
Oh, it's actually
yeah. So that jacket we made, but that's different than the Musso and Frank's one.
that's a gratuitous Steve McQueen with his shirt open shot, because the medallion seems to me the thing that
Yeah, I took
Stuck
that from
with
Steve
me.
McQueen for sure. And I knew, I've been trying to get a medallion in a movie, I think, for a while. But I like the idea of a friend of mine makes these amazing medallions, and he made that medallion and it's got his Rick Dalton's initials. There's another T-shirt there that came from Quentin as well, Lion Speedway, which is a classic LA, I guess, go-karty kind of place, Speedway.
Okay.
I don't know. Does anybody know it? I never knew it. I wasn't raised in LA, but it's a real logo, and we recreated that shirt. But that was Quentin's idea.
Okay.
I mean, I think of Quentin like the UCSC, UCSC Banana Slug T-shirt on John. That was actually a question I had from him in our first interview because
Oh, really?
I'm from Santa Cruz and I wanted to know how that T-shirt came to be. So I knew the T-shirt message shirts would play in the movie. I was just waiting for Quentin to tell me what they were.
Right. Okay. Because Barbara Ling, the production designer, gets to do all these signs and
Yeah,
all kinds of
exactly.
graphics, and then you get to sort of have a little bit of
Yeah.
it. And then here we're at. Well, tell us the story about this particular look. This is, I think, she wears it to the Rosemary's Baby premiere.
In real life,
right? Sharon Tate.
Tate wore, it was an Ozzie Clark, who was a big fashion designer, English fashion designer in the 60s. And she, I did some very deep research about it. It seems like that was bespoke. It was made for her, or she had him make it for the Rosemary's Baby premiere in London. And I went on the hunt for it, which doesn't exist. So we recreated it. With not real snake, not real python. It's printed.
There's a sense that that you didn't necessarily literalize. I mean, she's so well documented, though. But there's sort of a feel like if you look at photos of Sharon Tate in many of the books, you get a sense of her taste. Like you really get a sense of what she might have purchased. And like the yellows, yellow comes back a lot in her kind of candid photos.
Yeah, I
and
used
things.
yellow because I just felt it was a really beautiful, was a very, popular color at that time that you see in fashion, you see in interior design, you see in cars. And also I just loved yellow, the idea of it on Margot and as Sharon, and just how yellow makes you feel positive and optimistic. And I spent a lot of time with Deborah Tate, Sharon Tate's sister. And the crazy thing is, this happened on Walk the Line too. It's just really odd. On Walk the Line, when we were prepping Walk the Line, Johnny Cash and June's estate was being cataloged for Sotheby's. They did a catalog, and we didn't have access to it. And Jim Mangold, the director-writer, had been very close with Johnny Cash, and we had thought we were going to have access to these effects of them, but then we couldn't. And then when we were prepping this movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, after 50 years, Deborah Tate decided to auction some of Sharon's effects, which I just thought was so poignant in many ways, to hold on to those items for her for 50 years. I think has been, I can't imagine, I can't imagine. She's been really the protector of Sharon's memory and everything, and for her to put some of those items on auction, I thought was a really wonderful place for her to be in, and a very, that she could kind of let go of some of the stuff. And Deborah's very generous with her time, and luckily Quentin had developed a relationship with her, so she was a consultant on her film. And I got to go see Sharon's clothes before they went on auction and touch them and get a sense of the proportion and
the fabrics too, right? I mean, did you?
Yeah, I didn't, and that, they were really delicate, and they were going to an auction, and I didn't really want to use them in the film. They actually weren't even pieces that would make sense for our film.
Right.
But I did ask Deborah if there's some costume jewelry, and I asked her if it would be possible to borrow that jewelry if Margot was interested to use in the film. I thought, kind of like the belt buckle, for Margot, that might be a very, we all, this is really a love letter to Sharon Tate from Quentin in so many ways, and wanting to honor who she was, and not, all I really knew about Sharon Tate was who she was in death, but I didn't really know what her life was like. I mean, I'd seen some of her movies, so to be able to explore who she was and talk to her sister about her was really great. It was really helpful. So to have a piece of some of her jewelry, and Margot was really open to it, and Quentin loved the idea. So most of the jewelry that Margot wore in the movie was Sharon's jewelry.
Okay. Was the bag, because I know there's a lot of photos of her, and like Romy Schneider and a lot of actresses of that era were also wearing that Chanel bag, which is so incongruous when you think of sort of the era, but they all had the kind of, status bag in so many photos.
Sharon had that Chanel bag, and Margot Robbie happens to be a Chanel ambassador,
right,
and I happen to know them, and I just thought that was also, it is a status bag, and I also thought it was really interesting, and in terms of like, it tells us how kind of what her life, like her and Roman lived in London for a lot of time. She was very fashionable. She was very photographed, and she was about what was in fashion at that time. And I thought having that Chanel bag and kind of what that represents for a young woman was a great kind of signifier and accessory to kind of tell us kind of where she is, for many people who in the audience, younger generations who didn't know who she was, kind of the circles she was hanging in that we see with, and they had money, and I just thought that it was just like one of those things that was good.
Did you ever get to the bottom of why Roman Polanski dressed that way with the cravats? I kind of think maybe she dressed him, and that was her idea of the jabot and everything
I
with
have
her.
no idea, but maybe Mike Myers knows.
Right.
From Austin Powers. I have no idea. I mean, it was fashionable, right? It was Carnaby Street. They lived in London.
Right.
It was Carnaby Street fashion. Okay. You saw a lot of British pop bands at the time who dressed like that.
The Monkees and everything.
Yeah,
right?
Dave Clark 5.
Well, there's a lot of fashion moments or sort of iconic moments that are very Sharon Tate. But then the moments that stick with me are the sort of cutoffs and when she's on her own, kind of, And to me, there was a moment where it sort of made me. It reminded me of how young she was, and then and then how young Kitty Cat was. There's sort of almost like they're both in sort of strike. Like there was sort of a sense memory on the screen for me of those two.
Yeah. Well, that was on purpose for me. Like I wanted to put her in cutoffs so that we would see just exactly that generationally she's just the same as the Manson girls, just totally different happenstances, different lives. The T-shirt, however, wasn't my idea at all. Okay. That was pure Quentin. There was one of the young women on our set who was wearing like a vintage striped T-shirt, and Quentin's like, I think she should wear that, and I was really against it because I felt that I hadn't seen any reference of a research of anything like that Sharon wore. She wore more peasanty, more feminine, and I lost that battle, and in the end I like it. So I think it works on that level, in that scene where she's actually, I don't know if we really know it in the final cut, if the audience knows it, but she's packing Roman's clothes for his trip to London.
Okay.
And at home and relax. So I think ultimately it works, but people really like that costume.
Yeah. I want to ask about the Manson family, because what kind of archives did you draw on? Because there's not that much. There's a bit in the LA, I think the LA Times did some photos in the early 70s, right before, at the farm, I think, at the spot.
There's actually a lot.
There is a lot?
Yeah,
okay.
There's a lot out there. And also just that milieu of young people. And I think for me, the biggest thing about the Manson family and the Manson girls is I wanted to show how young they were. And because they were very, very young. And my aunt lived in Topanga Canyon just at that time and had been to Spawn Ranch, and had met those people, and not because she was in the Manson family, but because it was kind of this milieu of kind of hippie lifestyle. And I really felt I understood that milieu of young people. Not necessarily what they did, but I mean just the way that they dressed, and they were making a break with the way the culture was changing, and these are a lot of runaways and young kids that were really leaving society as we know it to kind of drop out, tune in and drop out. And so that I really wanted it to feel real. And it's hard with the 60s and 70s because it's very easy to look retro. And I really tried to make choices that felt quieter.
Right, and with the background players too, because there's a lot of people to draw. There's the principals that we're all thinking of, but then there are many big scenes like the Playboy Mansion or you closed one of the streets, and there's all kinds of people just walking in the street, right, in the background. So you have to oversee how everyone looks, and they don't all look like they stepped out of a 1969 catalog, right?
Hopefully
yeah.
not.
No, I mean, that's what I mean. Like the point.
Oh, yeah, wigs and makeup and costume. Yeah, I mean, we had endless fittings. I had an incredible crew and, amazing team of costumers and fitters and shoppers. And, we had fittings are going on continually throughout the whole film.
Are you able to be as hands-on with that, with the kind of like
sometimes I'm in and out. So we figured out a space, my supervisor Linda Foote and I, so that the background fittings could happen in close proximity to where I was doing day player and principal fittings, so that I could pop in and out. And there would also often do these costume parades if I was like setting up a fitting in the other room for a principal, where I'd get they'd get 5 background players and do a costume parade. And I definitely did some fittings when I could, but there's 120 speaking parts in the film. So I was really fitting every single day and establishing new costumes on characters up until the last week of shooting. And it was the longest shooting schedule I'd ever been on. We started shooting in June of 2018, and we wrapped we took a break for Thanksgiving and then came back for a week after Thanksgiving. So it was the longest shoot I'd ever been on.
There are many, many characters, and I look at Al Pacino and I think, was there like a Swifty Lazar kind of thing with the glasses? Or I wanted to also ask if one of the characters is Maya Hawke, who is, the daughter of one of his many, muse actresses.
Thurman, yeah.
Uma Thurman. Was there any kind of little Easter egg in her costume that was planted there?
We also had Rumor Willis, Bruce Willis's daughter, who's also part of the
family.
And Tim Roth's son has he's one of the kids at Spawn Ranch. So, there's a lot of one of Quentin's longtime producers' daughters is one of the Spawn Ranch girls, and Sally, his editor, who passed away for many years, her daughter, well, actually, she was in the camera department. So there's a lot of generational. Okay. I mean, the younger generational cast was so great and so much fun. From Austin Butler, who's amazing, who plays Tex.
Right, and he's going to be, I want to say Elvis or something.
Yeah, Elvis.
Now he's going to be Elvis in the big Elvis thing. So.
To Margaret Qualley, who plays Pussycat, and I mean, it's just fantastic. Quentin's casting is amazing.
So when you're working on something that's the biographical with the fiction in it, and you've done it, the fictionalized versions, or of people's lives, or how do you balance kind of staying true, being accurate with the narrative that's the fictional narrative or the vision of the director, like there's a W.E., for example, which is sort of posits something about Wallace and Edward, and you're working with costumes that are very, sometimes literal, but also you're kind of imagining that, like staying true to the kind of the director as opposed to history.
Well, when working with Jim Mangold on Walk the Line, he said to me, look, actually, before that, working on The People vs. Larry Flynt, I had a meeting with Larry Flynt himself and was going, I was, nobody accompanied me. It was just me going to have a meeting with Larry Flynt, which I was very young in my career and a little uncomfortable at the thought. And I went to his building in Los Angeles, Larry Flynt Publications, and had a meeting with Larry Flint. And he sat and went through family albums to show me photos of his wife, Althea, who Courtney Love plays, passed away from AIDS. And I spent about 2.5 hours with him. It was so surreal, where we were going through photo albums and he's telling me stories about Althea and about himself. And I saw a side of him, a side I would never imagine. I was raised with a feminist mother who, was horrified when I told her I was doing The People versus Larry Flint. And I explained to her it's about, it's about the court case. It's about the court case. But anyway, I was just,
I can
sometimes
only
working
imagine,
in this
actually,
business,
but-
you just end up in places you just never could ever even imagine, and that was one of them. And he looked at me at one point and he said, you're making a movie about my life. Do what you need to make it interesting. He basically spent 2.5 hours with me telling how everything was, and then looked at me and said, but make it up if you want, if it makes a better movie. So I appreciated that permission, and I
Right.
took that back to Milos Forman, who is the director, I don't even think he was like, yeah, okay. I thought it was amazing. Also another very intimidating director. But Jim Mangold, when we were making Walk the Line, and also when we were making 3:10 to Yuma, also with Jim Mangold, making Walk the Line, he made it very clear that while we're making a film about a real person, we're making a film, a narrative film, and that it's not about getting stuck in what was, but in serving the story that we're telling. And that, like my conversation with Mr. Flint, takes the air out of the room and gave me permission to spread my wings a little bit and be sensitive to the story we're telling. So, which is not to say that doing the research is the most important thing, so you have a fluency or an idea or a through line or things about these people that would resonate and make sense when you're creating these characters and also when talking with the actors. So, and Jim Mangold did the same thing when we were making 3:10 to Yuma. He told me, please don't watch any Westerns. That is a mistake. And, this is really, I don't care what existed. This is about, he's kind of like a theater director in that the way, and if you look at his films, most of his films are medium shots or close-ups. They're very intimate, the dialogue and the way. So whether or not, Madonna's much more exacting. She directed W.E., but we take liberties. It's not documentary filmmaking of what is, and I think I've been lucky to work with directors and people who gave me permission to bring, Quentin too, to bring something to the table. That's, I would say, the best thing about working with Madonna for 22 years is that she expects you to bring something to the table. Tom Ford as well. When you think of these people that are very precise in the way that they are aesthetically, they're also extremely collaborative. And just being invited to collaborate on that level is really, really a gift and super lucky.
And they understand sort of the power of the visual language of clothing or fashion, depending on the context, right? Of costume. And
Tom and Madonna for sure.
Yeah. You've been doing this for a while in film, but I feel like in the last 5 or 7 years, there has never been more coverage of costume design than there is now. And it's like certainly a part of every studio and film's marketing plan whenever possible. Do you get a feeling that the audience understands costume more than they might have, 15 years ago? Or do the people in the industry understand what costume design is and does better than?
Not really.
No?
I don't think so, unfortunately. We still have producers that are, people have no idea what it takes. What it
just
takes
shopping, right?
time-wise.
It's just shopping.
Well, that's
the
most offensive, right? As costume designers are I'm sure there's Are there,
Are there
is there any-
costume designers
Are
in
there
the
any
audience?
costume
Okay,
people?
yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, that's always the assumption, like, which can go me on another tangent about pay equity and costume design, and, it's women's work and, shopping, and you just make it happen. So I do think that the reason why we have more outlets, we have more with the internet and reality TV, people are more interested in. I think it's great to be able to talk about costume and to have a room of people that are interested. It's really talking about character development and about storytelling, which is costume is one of the storytelling aspects of filmmaking.
Well, we're in this moment though, where you think of Instagram or global visual culture, where we're decoding the sort of semiotics of what a politician might be wearing or and what they're conveying, because maybe they don't speak very much, but they're telling us something
It's our identity,
through what
how
they're
we
wearing,
want
right?
the world to perceive us, right?
When you're working on tour costumes for Madonna, is there sort of a narrative at play there? I think of the different eras of the tours that you've done.
For sure.
Where you're I'm thinking of the tour where there was very militaristic, and the time
American Life.
where there was and then the videos I guess that went with that, where there was the Che Guevara kind of inflected.
That album was, the American Life single, and help me out here if there's any Madonna fans. I'm like,
well, that particular one,
Yeah.
but that seems like that's that's sort of speaking to what was happening culturally too,
yeah,
right?
it's part of Madonna's narrative. I mean,
Yeah.
she sees herself, literally as a rebel and as an artistic, someone who's constantly using her voice to challenge people and to express have artistic freedom, and that's part of her narrative. And that particular era was. Yeah, that was in the.
Wasn't that under? Right?
It
Wasn't
was
that sort
after
of?
Ray of Light. Mayor
Right.
Way produced that album. Yeah, it was really, really great. We looked at Che Guevara and Patty Hearst and all kinds of.
But then
images.
what was happening in America at the time was sort of this groundswell of like a certain kind of patriotism and sort of conservatism, I guess, is the thing too,
and,
right?
Desert Storm.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, she's had a long career of being culturally relevant. Oh, years, over 30 years.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, at least. I mean, if you can't, depending on how far back you go,
Yeah,
like really.
35 years.
So when you design for a tour, or I guess I want to ask about designing for stage, because you did Hedwig, and to me that's a perfect way of asking about the technical considerations for a film versus Hedwig on Broadway, where it's much more active. Can you talk a bit about the difference there, like the demands of the costumes that you have to create?
Yeah, I mean, with Hedwig, it had started as an off-Broadway play, which I didn't design. It came to me as a small independent film we shot in Toronto, actually, and so I didn't have the typical experience of kind of play to film, which is usually how it goes. So this was film to play, to film to theater for me. So, gosh, when I read that script, I didn't understand it at all. But John Cameron Mitchell is so brilliant that I just was like, I'm going to follow it. I believe you. Like, there's animation here, and it was just so confusing to me, and it was like the most important experience I would say of my whole career. Just in terms of, I had been working on a big studio film, and I quit before I got fired. And it was a film I didn't want to do. I kind of got seduced into it, and I kind of went against what I thought was right for me, and I quit before I probably was going to get fired to go do Hedwig, which I had been. I knew I was going to do a year before we shot it, and it was so great. And I was in Toronto. I had 2 people in my crew. I was bedazzling myself. I was
Cutting up
sewing
wigs for the
myself.
hairdress or whatever.
Yes, we used wigs.
Before or after Margiela did his hairdress, was that?
I don't even know.
No, okay.
I don't know,
Oh.
but and that really helped me kind of get back to what was important for me, and that what Hedwig is about at the core was kind of Rocky Horror Picture Show was such a big deal for me when I was a teenager, just in terms of adolescence and figuring out who I was and um, self-expression and androgyny and sexuality, all these crazy themes at 13, going to see Rocky Horror Picture Show and dressing up, and it was so celebratory, and it was such a big part of my identity as a young person to figure out who I was creatively. And Hedwig was kind of my Rocky Horror Picture Show, as well as everyone else on the set, because what it's about, being true to yourself, the message in the film, the transformation, the humor, the pathos, and the sheer brilliance of John Cameron Mitchell. And it was a teeny tiny film, we shot in 28 days, and it just kind of put me back into why I wanted to be a costume designer and be a filmmaker. And it was so, I don't know, I didn't answer your question.
But you kept the costumes. That's
Yes,
very
I
not
have the
that's
costumes.
atypical, right? You typically
Well, I made
wouldn't.
that deal with them.
Okay.
So I'm not going to tell you what film I quit before I got fired.
I'm not gonna ask you.
You can ask me
Later.
one-on-one, but I went before I left that film, and I stole back a bunch of costumes because I knew I literally filled my car. I asked the costume designer who was replacing me if he was going to use my costumes that I had amassed. And he said, no, no, no. I actually had lunch with him. It was a very happy thing that I was leaving. And so I'm like, okay, well, look the other way. And I went on my last day, and I filled my car up with these costumes because I had scoured all these amazing vintage pieces. I had gone to a warehouse in St. Louis called Hullabaloo, which doesn't exist anymore. And I had spent 10 days like mining, and scavenging for these great pieces. So I took them to Canada and pulled them apart, re-dyed them, sewed them back together, bedazzled them, whatever. And that was the way that I could afford, because there's no money for those costumes. We did some thrifting, I think, in Toronto as well. But my deal with the producers was, look, I'm going to own these, I want to own these costumes. So I've actually auctioned a couple of them for different charities, like when gay marriage was the Yes on 8, and we did a couple. Mike Potter, the guy who created the Hedwig wig, we've done some stuff, but I still have a few of them at home.
Did you use them as reference then to sort of, because people
Oh,
want
for the play.
Because there's a bit of people want to see those, even if they're writ large and differently,
I'd love
right?
to give them somewhere where they'd be displayed. But you mean did I reference them for the Broadway
Yes,
version with
yeah.
Neil Patrick Harris? Yeah, because the costume, the denim costume, that's the main costume in the Broadway show. The idea of that costume was Hedwig is kind of has a sex change to leave East Berlin, which sounds crazy, before the wall went down.
It works in the movie though.
Yeah.
That's what matters, right? So,
Yeah. And so that costume is kind of was part of, so I knew that denim costume was going to be a key costume in the play, because and I wanted to make that costume like the Berlin Wall. So I don't know if you have any pictures of that, but
there's a few Hedwigs in there rotating.
my husband and I had been to Berlin and seen those, the pieces of the wall that they have there that you can still see with all the graffiti and everything. And I wanted the Broadway costume to have that effect. You don't have the luxury, obviously, in theater to do those kind of as many costume changes or that many scenes. And Neil Patrick Harris, who started the role. We had a few people, Michael C. Hall, John Cameron Mitchell, Andrew Reynolds, Darren Criss, who all ended up playing Hedwig, but they never leave the stage that much to change. And we have the hair. Oh, so that's from the movie,
Right.
And that's like thrifted, and I think I believe we made the T-shirt, but yeah. So yeah, and then we had the haircut, the
the
hairdress, and
hairdress.
it was just more distilled down.
Right. Before we open up to audience questions, you mentioned auctioning some of the pieces for charity, and am I right in understanding that you designed the Times Up logo? And is that right?
Yeah, by default.
By
yeah.
default, and so you're very active in red carpet philanthropy right now, and with the RAD and with just generally you're agitating all over the place. But but with RAD, which is red.
RAD stands for Red Carpet Advocacy, which
okay.
is an endeavor that I launched in January with my business partner, Karina Martin. And it's about social progress, really. It's about using platforms. I came to a point, I think actually, being around Madonna, every time Madonna would go to Africa she's built a couple schools and orphanages and a pediatric surgery unit in Malawi, Africa, and every time she would go and invite me, I was running off to go do a film or to do something else. And I started to feel that I wanted to, and also our election happened, and we all know, I mean, that just was like the bubble, like I have to do something. And so I launched this endeavor called RAD, Red Carpet Advocacy, and we help talent raise money and create advocacy for nonprofits and causes that they believe in, and we do it on the red carpet and beyond. Like recently, we just had a dinner for Patricia Arquette to celebrate her 2 Emmy nominations last week, and we had a dinner. We brought Brandon to make a donation to her charity. She has a charity called givelove.org. I did the same with Margot Robbie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So the idea is to figure out ways to be philanthropic and create advocacy along the promotional road of what we do anyway. So
Right, because that's such a part of the business. Like it's sort of an unavoidable part. So why not leverage it in some way?
and I think everybody has platforms now. Everybody has social media and talent especially talks directly to we all can talk to our fans and followers, and people are just, it's just a way to be purposeful and not so promotional, and to inspire people, kind of how we elected Obama in the States, like $5 here and $10 here. That's really about how we move the needle. And it's just, we live especially in the States, in a time where, whether it's the environment or our horrible situation with our president, everybody has to do something to make the world better. And I've never really had the time to join a charity. I've tried to, and then I end up traveling or this and that, and I don't really feel like I ever really have made enough money to write a check, so it's just a way to kind of leverage those moments when everybody's watching on the red carpet or whatever, to do some good.
And the red carpet is also sort of, it's a lot, the focus is a lot on women. It's sort of this liminal economy. Like it's this ecosystem where women get to sort of, they're both looked at, and it's also women who are sort of paying attention to that in an interesting way. It's meant to now, but
we also don't want to take, like, everybody. I love the fashion on the red carpet. I love, and it's not just award shows. It's premieres.
Going to Starbucks is a red carpet moment now for people. I mean, it's captured on.
Selfie culture,
so.
And it's just like when we launched with Elizabeth Moss at the Golden Globes this past year, and she wanted to advocate for the ACLU, so we helped get all the messaging from the ACLU of what they were working at the time, which was families at the border, and we asked the designers who she was wearing, her Christian Dior dress and her Tamara Mellon shoes, if they wanted to support, and we created like a social media campaign where Elizabeth, has a call, tells her fans about the ACLU and what they're working on at that time, and how it's important to get involved and how they can get involved. And if you want to make a donation, swipe up. $5 helps, get a whatever at the time.
Yeah, whatever it might be. So.
But it's been really, really. I actually we were incubating it when we were shooting Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Karina, my partner, and I, and it's been incredible 9 months, and it's really been really wonderful to be able to have different conversations with talent now about what people care about and how we can make the world a better place, really, by using our platform.
The tools at your disposal, basically. Well, I think we have to wrap up, so I want to say thank you very much to the twice Academy Award nominated Arianne Phillips for this really interesting